Wilder's School of Public Policy over at VCU that the governor who won by 15 points now has a disapproval rating of 47% versus a approval rating of 44% amongst registered voters. 9% said they're just unsure of that. For someone who won by 15 points, this is something that's caught my attention. What do you think, sir?
Well, I think that, I think the turn seems to me that so far she seems to be following a fairly liberal course. And I think the people elected her because they thought that she was going to do something about affordability. And I don't think that's really happening yet. It doesn't look like that's been a program that she's been able to try to address. I think that she's a much more liberal governor than maybe a lot of people expected when they voted for her. And I think that there was a reaction when they voted for her against the president. I guess the people didn't like Donald Trump very much, and she offered an alternative to that. But now she's the governor, so it's her obligation to try to carry through on doing something right for the people of Virginia. And I don't think that's proven out yet.
Well, it's interesting because when she was running on, I'm going to bring down inflation, I'm going to bring down affordability. I'll ask you, as our former governor, how would a governor bring down inflation within the Commonwealth of Virginia? That's more of an economic policy that comes out of D.C.
Well, that's correct. You can't do that as the governor of the state. You're part of the national economy, and that's just the way that is. And the national government is going to be controlling much of that. But there are things you could do. There are initiatives you could take to cut taxes. You'll recall that when I went in, I said that I was going to cut the car tax and went to work immediately on that. And after 4 years, we did get 70% off. Now, of course, as I've said on the show before, the formula was put into place by the legislature after I left that would quietly reinstate the car tax, which I'm very frustrated about. But the point is this: the people knew that I had actually carried through on an initiative to do that. And there were other things as well. I was thinking last night about the fact that tuition is so high now. People are very worried about that. And people who send their kids to college, they're just spending a lot of money. When I was governor, I said I was going to do something about that, and I cut tuition. The colleges hated that, of course. They didn't want to go through any processes of trying to control spending on their campuses. But we cut that. So the people saw initiatives that were being made in order to try to help people's pocketbooks. I don't think we've seen that yet from Governor Spanberger.
Well, the interesting thing for me was her positives. 44% of registered voters said that they found that she was doing a good job. Okay, that's interesting. But I also noticed that in this same poll, 39% say Virginia's headed in the I'm sorry. Let me make sure I get this right. 47% that they found negative on her standing as the governor. And then whether we're going the right or wrong direction, 47% said the Commonwealth's going in the wrong direction. I thought that was interesting. But her personal disapproval rating, or approval rating, I should say, I'm getting all this confused. Let me slow down a little bit. 44% of registered voters approved of the job that she was doing, Governor. Then 39% also said that the Commonwealth is going in the right direction. So the fact that 39% say that we're going in the wrong direction, or excuse me, I'm going to confuse this. I should have wrote this out more clear. I apologize, sir. 39% said we're going in the right direction, which is below her personal popularity. So that tells me even more voters are starting to really think, wait a minute, what did I get myself into? If I've got over 60% of the people saying, I don't like the direction we're going in, that says something to me.
Yes, and again, it was a wave election the last time around, and it was, I believe it was an election that was rejecting President Trump in Virginia. But the result was a overwhelming majority, particularly in the House of Delegates, for the Democrats, and they proceeded immediately to follow their ideas and the more liberal ideas as a Democratic majority. I think people didn't like that. I think that I was doing some reading, Rich, too, over the last couple of days about artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is necessarily showing up in your poll yet, but there's a concern that people have that artificial intelligence may in fact be a new wave of job losses, particularly on white collar people, not necessarily working people. The Chinese development some years ago cost working people their jobs. The artificial intelligence may very well cost white collar people their jobs. So that means that kids are going to college. The colleges are charging enormous amounts of money. They're having to take student debt. They're coming out with student debt and having to pay that. And yet the jobs may very well not be there that they thought they were going to college to get. That creates great frustration. And therefore, I was thinking about that because yesterday you were talking a lot about the younger people that are electing socialists now, Democratic socialists who are in the Democratic Party to the Congress. Last time I talked to you about this, I was sketchy about that. I didn't think that mattered all that much. A few Congress people here and there, but there have been more since we last talked. And I think that may be what's really going on. I think there's a certain frustration that the opportunities in America and also in Virginia don't seem to be there for people. That is going to reflect then, of course, in your poll, because people expect the governor to be uplifting, and that doesn't seem to be happening yet.
And that's a wonderful point to make, because I think a lot of this is just driven by frustration. She promised us one thing, she hasn't delivered on this. And you look, okay, how did you make this more affordable? Well, you stood up a couple new agencies. You put us back into the greenhouse gas initiative, which is going to make my electric bills go up. Now Dominion's saying our electric bills are going up because of the transmission lines. You were supposed to push back against all of this, but I just see my paycheck shrinking because my bills are getting higher and higher. And you promised this is what you were going to do, and I see something different. I think that's one of the reasons why her poll numbers have slipped so severely since her landslide victory. Now, as someone who sat in that governor's mansion before, when you see poll numbers like this, what goes through your head? What does your team say? Do you try to triangulate? Okay, let me listen to the voice of the people. What happens internally?
Well, you try to address things the best way that you can, but again, you only get 4 years as governor of Virginia, and as I said before, you need to hit the ground running in your first year, because that's the year that the legislature usually will cooperate with you more. But look what really happened at this legislature. Louise Lucas actually decided that she was going to decide what the issue was going to be on the organizations that
it turned out to be on
data centers.
on data centers, and it turned out that was kind of a dodge because they were really working on marijuana legislation.
Well, it may very well be that people are waking up to the fact that we're now increasing our drug culture as things go forward with the marijuana legislation. But I really believe that the data centers maybe made a difference. Now, as a governor that worked very hard on economic development and the creation of jobs and talked about it a lot, Rich, as I was doing it and explaining how I was doing it, it seemed to me that the data centers are going to put Virginia on the cutting edge of the artificial intelligence revolution. But I've talked to a lot of people over the past week since I talked to you that are repelled by the idea of the creation of the data centers, and they want to have some sense that they're not going to be paying higher Dominion electrical bills if the data centers are going to be built. But what's the news been this week? The news has been that, in fact, electrical bills are going to increase. That's been the news over the last 2 days. So people are seeing the same pattern, and that is that the expenses are going higher, and we have a governor who's not really taking any local initiatives, never mind the fact that the federal elections are coming up and have to be addressing these things. But you're asking me to talk about why the poll numbers are the way they are.
1 minute.
You'll have to study them, but I'm just observing the things that.
No,
that
I'm right there with you.
The governor.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. In fact, the poll that also has her underwater says 81% believe data center operators should be required to pay for the additional strain of that the facilities place on the state's electric grid. You want to have a winning issue right there? Get in front of upgrading our electric grid, finding new sources of energy, and finding a way to help regulate. Regulate's not the right word, but figure out how we're going to solve the data center issue in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You'd win by 50 points.
But that's not what's going on.
Exactly.
As it turns out, Louise Lucas may have had her finger more on the pulse of the people on this than the governor did. Now, I want to say again that my first reaction was a traditional economic development idea, and I believe that keeping your word to people who are investing capital in the Commonwealth is a good reputation to have. But frankly, the people of Virginia are not reacting that way. They're saying basically, look, we don't care about any of that. We want to worry about our kitchen table issues. And the fact is that that we are not happy that state money is going for the development of data centers. And I always felt those things can be harmonized. But I'm beginning to think, based on your polling and everything I'm talking to people about right now, that it can't be harmonized. That a real initiative is going to have to be made by the governor to say, okay, if I'm going to keep doing the data centers, here are the efforts I'm going to be making to control expenses, to control the environment, to control the noise and the placement, and to make sure that the people of Virginia are not paying the extra electrical bills. But as I said, this week we actually saw the commitment that people are going to have to pay more in electricity. What happens when all the data centers come online?
Yeah,
so I think people are worried about that.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. All right, we're going to continue our conversation with Governor Gilmore coming up here in just a moment. The president will speak tonight, and undoubtedly he's going to talk about international relations. We'll talk about that with Governor Gilmore coming up at 9:03. Today's program is brought to you in part by our friends at AWRVA.